From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Of course, the big news, the only news really, the tariffs. And just as I suspected, he backed off on almost all of them, except China. I don't know what's going on. Go to better news sources than I to get all the details on that. I'll just say generally that I mean, who didn't see this coming all along? You know, he puts one foot in, he takes one foot out, and he does his little tariff hokey pokey, and we all lose our minds over it. And the stock market soars in one day just because he hokey pokeyed out of some of these tariffs. And it's all insane. It's just an insane system we live in, especially the idea that one person, let alone one madman, could have so much power over the world economy. It just doesn't make any sense. And that's what got me so agitated last week. The system itself is just insane. I was going to say fucking insane, but I did too much of that last week. So no more dropping the F-bomb unless absolutely necessary. All right, let's take a look at some boycotts and events coming up. We are in the midst of our Walmart boycott, April 7th through the 14th. Walmart boycott. Please make that permanent, but it is on the calendar for this week. Next week, April 18th. Is that Friday? I think it is. Mark your calendar. That's our big economic blackout number 2. Nationwide, all-inclusive, everybody. You don't buy a dime's worth of their junk for 24 hours. Sends a good message on our power. So, Friday, April 18th. Mark your calendars. Make your plans. It's a 24-hour blackout. Tesla takedowns continue. Hashtag Tesla takedown. Why not? They're fun. People getting very creative. I'm seeing lots of music and dancing out in front of Tesla dealerships as they shut them down for a day. Yeah, protesters are having fun out there. You got to have fun. That's an every Saturday event. As I always say, check your local... what do they say on TV? They used to say, what was the old expression? Check your local listings. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, check your local listings. Hashtag Tesla takedown. Here's the big one, April 19th. That's the big one. Everybody's getting in on April 19th. That's the next big nationwide. Everybody's in on this one. Handsoff2025.com, indivisible.org, 5050.1, 50 by 15. 5 by 15, all spelled out. 5by15.org. I don't know that one. I'll have to check it out. No kings. We're not going back, according to one of the Indivisible event pages. So find the information. It's our next World Day of Action, Saturday, April 19th. Of course, the day after April 19th is April 20th. Yeah, I did the math all by myself there. And April 20th is a big day. That's the day the Orange Menace might well declare the Insurrection Act, because it's 20 days past this little task force that's going to tell him the original excuse for even thinking about declaring the Insurrection Act was, of course, the southern border. Well, we're being invaded at the southern border, so that's reason enough. But then also, well, he was fully expecting us to hit the streets in outrage. So he thought maybe, well, by April 20th, we're going to be mad as hell. Even he's smart enough to see that. Well, if I do what I'm planning, they're probably going to be mad as hell. They might be banging on the White House doors. I might have to declare the Insurrection Act. I think he's counting on us to go crazy. So, yeah, we got to talk about our strategies going forward. I've already mentioned that there's a good possibility we might have to, I don't know, depending on what he does, we might have to be a little careful going out and put more of our emphasis on the boycotts and strikes. All right, what else? Well, while we are still going out on the streets, Lobby Day and Rally. Now, this is something in Wisconsin, but I don't know. April 23rd. Check your people and see if you have anything going on April 23rd regarding Lobby Day. Here in Wisconsin, we're protesting for our right to boycott. Many states, as you may know, what I've got in front of me here says 38 states have anti-boycott laws, especially when it comes to Israel. It's literally against the law to boycott Israel, which is insane, but it's true. So the right to boycott. Big rally, April 23rd, 9 a.m. in Madison at the state capitol. Check your people and see what's happening in your part of the world. Lobby Day and Rally, April 23rd, right to boycott. Something called Secular Week of Action, April 25th through May 4th. Spreading empathy for Secular Week of Action 2025. Humanist.com has got information on this. Reading from their website, empathy connects us all across political parties, religious traditions, genders, sexual orientations, races, economic status, abilities, and other lines of difference. Empathy drives compassionate action and empowers us to solve societal issues together. For Secular Week of Action 2025, running Friday, April 25th to Sunday, May 4th, we're calling on communities across the nation to help us spread empathy and support those most impacted by the government's drastic budget cuts and hateful orders. So the Secular Week of Action, April 25th through May 4th. Please mark your calendars for June 6th. It's a day of action from veterans, military veterans protesting for the end of fascism in the United States. D-Day anniversary protest, June 6th, Washington, D.C., and every state capital, city hall, and town hall. Veterans leading this one. And then just 1 week later, you may have heard that the Orange Menace is planning a big military parade for himself. On June 14th, apparently his 79th birthday coincides with the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. I think it's also Flag Day. So he used this as an excuse. He's wanted this since his first term. We talked about it a lot. He wants to have a big military parade like they have in North Korea and like they have in Russia and like they have in China. He wants big army tanks rolling down Black Lives Matter Boulevard. What a douche. The advice I'm hearing, and I agree, is that we ignore this one. We're all going to be out on April 19th. We're all going to be out on June 6th, joining the veterans. This is one we can skip. June 14th. Absolutely skip it. He wants numbers. That's all he cares about. Let's all just make other plans. Let's go to the park and have a picnic on that day. Let's all just stay in and watch old movies. Yeah, we need to absolutely skip that one. Just completely ignore it. It's tempting to go out and hold a sign across the street telling him how much you hate him. Yeah, I understand that. That's tempting. And it was actually my first thought. Oh, well, that'd be a good day of action. Let's rain on his parade. Yeah, I can see that. Again, that was the first thing I thought. But then I heard some others saying, yeah, let's just turn our back on this one. I think that'll hurt him the most. They make a good point. All right, some quick headlines here. Orange Menace had a quick little press avail with Bibi Netanyahu on Monday of this week, and it was just disgusting. He just casually and openly called for removing all Palestinians from Gaza. Forced migration, of course, is a war crime. So he's just openly advocating for committing war crimes. Forced migration, forced deportations are war crimes. They're crimes against humanity. And he just sits back in his little Oval Office chair with a war criminal sitting right next to him who should be arrested whenever he crosses the border into another nation. According to the International Criminal Court, he's a criminal charged with war crimes and needs to be arrested wherever he goes. But no, you can come to in the United States, you can come see your buddy, wannabe strongman Orange Menace, fellow war criminal. The reporters in the room didn't follow up, didn't say a word, didn't say boo. He openly calls for a heinous war crime that affects millions of people, and there's zero follow-up. They say nothing. Back to you in the studio. They go to the anchors. They say nothing. Not a peep. The International Criminal Court, the ICC, defines deportation as a war crime and a crime against humanity. Refugee protection, forced deportation of refugees, is an internationally recognized human rights violation, which both the Orange Menace and Bibi the Butcher are guilty of. The White House is openly talking about bombing Mexico, using drones to bomb cartels. According to several sources, officials are discussing within the walls of the White House. He had a big ceremony this week promoting coal production. Signed another meaningless executive order to subsidize and promote coal production. I guess next week he'll be subsidizing and promoting whale oil and buggy whips and spittoons. Mentioned the tariffs briefly, of course. We're not going to get into that. We don't need to. Everyone, everywhere, all at once is talking about the tariffs. It's all they can think about. They're obsessed. Is there anybody out there who didn't know? Apparently they didn't, because everyone was sweating so hard. Really, seriously, you didn't know he was going to reverse course on the tariffs? And that the stock market would soar? Who didn't know that? and this reaction to the tariffs, yeah, of course it was bad news. And yeah, of course it affected people's retirement funds. And yeah, it threatens a recession and people might lose their jobs. And of course it's serious. I'm not saying it's not serious. But at the same time, anybody who's half awake knew that he was going to back off, knew that the stock market would soar. And within days or weeks, or certainly within a couple of months, certainly within a year, it's going to be breaking records again. Who doesn't know that? So to just lose your mind over this piece of news, while things like renditions and forced deportations and bullying law firms and universities and media into submission, firing federal workers, I mean, everything he's done for the last, 80 days or something like that, slashing programs for U.S. aid that literally means the death of thousands, usurping the authority of the courts, of Congress, acting like a king, acting like a despot. Not to mention the personal grift, his meme coins and his crypto, his $3 million golfing trips, taking over the Department of Justice for his own ends. These ridiculous, comically unqualified, ludicrous cabinet picks. Nothing got to you like the tariff story did. Just breathless, just beside yourself. Had nothing to say about the blatant racism and grift and abuse and corruption of the first 80 days compared to your response here on the tariffs, because it might affect your wallet. This country. The whole immigration issue, ICE raids, rendition, forced deportation, that whole story came to my city, right down the street here at City Hall. Some folks were abducted by ICE. State Senator Chris Larson would like the state legislature to do something about this. Yeah, ICE is using methods that are especially heinous because it's unusually cruel and it affects public safety. In this case, folks doing business in the criminal justice system. Senator Larson said actions that erode faith in the criminal justice system create cracks in the social contract. Yeah, if you need to interact with the criminal justice system for one reason or another, you have to be protected. And that's why local officials have never been bound by law to enforce federal immigration law. As Senator Larson was quoted here in this article, if they can't go to school without fear of being picked out of their classroom, if they can't go to their house of worship without fear of being pulled out of their congregation. And in this case, if they can't voluntarily be part of the criminal justice system to be able to defend themselves against accusations of crimes, or taking it to the next step, if they can't come here and testify against somebody who has violated their civil rights, yes, they have civil rights, or to bear witness to somebody else who's been the victim of a crime, then those people suddenly are not part of the social contract in our society. That's exactly right. And that is exactly why local authorities are not bound by law to enforce the agenda of ICE, America's Gestapo. And for a couple of very good reasons that I've already alluded to. First, it's just cruel. Can you imagine living a life where maybe your papers aren't in order, but you've got a citizen spouse and citizen children, and you've been working and paying your taxes, and you can't go out of your house to live your life. You can't go to church, you can't go to school, you can't go to your job. If you need to avail yourself of the services of the police, you can't call them, God forbid, you can't get mixed up. As Larson pointed out, you can't even be a witness against someone else who committed a crime. That's why there's a separation between the Gestapo and local authorities that is now being violated everywhere. Now it's an issue of public safety. Well, gee, it looks like I may have the measles, but I can't go to the hospital. I can't go to a doctor. They might turn me in. I can't send my kids to go get vaccinated. They might get turned in, held for questioning. I can't testify against that criminal I witnessed. Gee, there's a house on fire next door. I better not call the fire department. I don't want to get mixed up in anything. They might turn me in. It's a matter of public safety. If you haven't thought this through, if you think, well, if someone's here illegally, ICE has every right. No, they don't have every right. Plus, can we please be clear again? I think people need reminding all the time. To be here without your papers in order is not a crime. I don't care how many times you hear the Orange Menace and his people say so. It's not a criminal act to be undocumented. It's a civil violation. It's a goddamn parking ticket. That's why this thing with the IRS. Yeah, the IRS and ICE have this new agreement now where for the first time ever, the IRS can share very confidential, very personal documents if ICE suspects an undocumented person. So imagine this. You're undocumented, a minor civil violation, not a criminal one. You've been working here for years, maybe decades, paying your taxes, contributing to the community, contributing to the economy, and now you're afraid to file your taxes for fear of the IRS handing over your information to ICE. How is that good for anybody? This promise that mushmouth Tom Homan and ICE made about going after the criminals was just a colossal lie. They're going after your neighbor. They're going after regular folks. Did you see the 60 Minutes report last Sunday? On the 238 Venezuelans, at least we think they're Venezuelans, that's what we've been told, sent to El Salvador, 75% have not been charged or convicted of any crime. 75%. 22% are non-violent offenders, things like shoplifting or trespassing. Yeah, send them to an El Salvadorian gulag. And of the entire 238, a grand total of 12 are violent criminal offenders. 12. A dozen, an even dozen out of 238. And of course, among them, we know of a couple. The one sort of a theater kid makeup artist who's obviously wrongly accused and abducted, getting a lot of attention. A guy by the name of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. A judge ordered his return because he was mistakenly sent. And these are just the few we know about. There's a handful that families and immigration lawyers are fighting for. We have no idea who the rest of these 238 men are. But some great reporting by Time Magazine, by 60 Minutes. Yeah, 75% not charged or convicted of any crime. So yeah, these few cases now are in the courts where overall, yes, we're still on the winning side of almost every decision. There have been over 70 court rulings so far. Just today, I think it was, a couple of judges have restricted deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. That was the case that went to the Supreme Court, and they sort of punted. They said, well, we're not sure this is the right venue. We're not sure the litigants have standing. They keep using these excuses to not make decisions. So the Supreme Court is aiding and abetting the regime by just refusing to engage, basically. The good news this week was they did say unanimously in one of their decisions that deportations require due process. So that was the good news of the week. But they ignored other issues. Remember the judge who ordered the planes to be turned around that were going to El Salvador? He's made several rulings that have just been blatantly defied, ignored by the regime. SCOTUS so far being mostly very uncooperative, making the most limited rulings possible, always kicking it back, kicking it around. They're so afraid of making a decision. Yeah, so many cases, many of them about the illegal and unconstitutional firing of federal workers and shuttering of federal agencies. A judge ordered this week that the Trump administration restore the Associated Press to its rightful position in the press corps. You can't let other members of the press in and exclude one just because you don't like them. And every one of the cases so far pretty much ignored and are bouncing around appeals courts and eventually or sometimes quickly getting to the Supreme Court, where so far they have not been helpful. Now, in one bit of good news, because the courts stood firm, the regime has rescinded the order that attempted to freeze federal aid and spending. Back from day one, it bounced around for a couple of months. More bounced around the courts. And that order has now been rescinded. So that's good news. As far as the resistance goes, the IRS acting commissioner has resigned in protest over that agreement with ICE that we talked about. Yeah, this agreement between ICE and IRS is really a huge story. Didn't get enough attention in the media. So, righteous resignation continues to be part of the resistance. So, of course, there's much more. Mentioned Netanyahu's visit to the Oval Office. No mentions in the conventional media about the continued forced deportation, war crimes, genocide, and ethnic cleansing in Gaza this week. Bombs falling on hospitals, on women, on children. It's been several weeks now, I think 6 weeks, with zero aid coming into Gaza. Israel blocking all humanitarian aid, food, medicine, water. So yeah, had a couple of war criminals laughing it up in the Oval Office this week. Anyway, just some of the really heinous news, because God forbid we forget for a minute why it's so important that this whole thing be stopped. That we convince enough Republicans, against all odds, convince the few that might still retain a soul, that this all has to stop. Impeachment, now. We have to kill fascism in its cradle, because it's not going to be in its cradle for long if we allow all of this to continue. I heard one commentator compare us to Hungary, as I've done myself. But it took Viktor Orban 2-3 years to accomplish what the Orange Menace has accomplished in 80 days. So American fascism is not going to be in its cradle for much longer. It's going to be up on its feet, running around doing all sorts of damage. We got to stop this thing. Which brings us to mutual aid. Let's talk about this for a minute. We've come to a point here where we have to prioritize mutual aid because we're going to need it. If the economy crashes, a lot of us are going to be hurting with nowhere to turn, so we're going to have to turn to each other. Other scenarios are that the regime declares the Insurrection Act and really puts the hammer down on dissent. Free speech, freedom of assembly, arbitrary arrests, violence. These are all on the table. So this is why I feel very strongly that mutual aid has to become central to our strategy going forward. especially if, as I believe might be necessary, we have to emphasize strikes and boycotts over action in the streets due to this threatened violence. As great as the public demonstrations have been, and I'm very happy that we had such a big turnout last weekend, and I am still promoting April 19th for sure. As much as I'm advocating for that, I'm also being realistic about the regime's very possible, even likely, violent response. So here's what we're going to do. For the next couple of episodes here, we're going to take deep dives into two things. First, mutual aid. We're going to take some time to define what it really means, what it is, what it isn't, how to create a successful plan, how to put it into action, identifying community needs, building a team, establishing communications, organizing, recruiting, really putting this together. So next time, let's really talk about mutual aid. In the meantime, go ahead and do your homework. Search the term mutual aid. Do your own reading on this. Because we need to be up for the challenge here. And I believe more strongly than ever that mutual aid has to be a central part of our strategy going forward. Because of the scenarios ahead of us, one might be an economic crash, and the other might be an unleashing of violence and suppression from the regime. Now, speaking of that latter point, I also want to talk about what we should do if the Orange Menace does indeed invoke the Insurrection Act. If he brings violence into the equation, as he already has with undocumented folks, we need to talk about this. I found an excellent article, and you can look this up. I encourage you to look it up, and then we'll talk about it later. WagingNonviolence.org. Okay, jot this down. WagingNonviolence.org. Writer by the name of Daniel Hunter wrote an article entitled, "What Should We Do If Trump Invokes the Insurrection Act?" I encourage you to read it, and we'll talk about it in one of the upcoming episodes here, either the weekend show or next week for sure. Certainly before this deadline of April 20th that everybody's looking at. Okay? So, we'll talk about those things, but in the meantime, I encourage you to look up that article and also do your own research on exactly what mutual aid is and how you can implement it in your sphere, friends, neighbors. Okay? All right. That'll do it for today. This episode can be heard, of course, on your favorite platform. All episodes can be heard at charlespurcell.com. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, River West Radio, riverwestradio.com. Follow me on Facebook. Contact me, charlespurcell@gmail.com. Peter Donalds wrote and performed the theme song. All right. We'll see you out there. Love you.